Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DeCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. Hope everybody's doing well out there. It's been a while. It's surely been a minute. I've been absolutely slammed in personal life, all good things, absolutely, killing it, God willing, on a project that we're working on near the beach, and just a lot of great things going on in my life. So couldn't be happier. Kids are great, family's great, everything's amazing. So for those of you who have reached out and inquired about where I've been, that's just really the nuts and bolts of it all. It's just life, life and life's responsibilities have, sometimes they take over. And then I'll get lulls, I'll get, slower seasons where I may only have to run my businesses and not be doing a full-scale, ocean build at the same time. Not to brag, I'm just giving you the perspective, the scale of what's going on right now. So anyway, when that time comes, I can jump back in a lot more, and because I do want to. I do desire to be involved in the discussion. I do desire to take the sledgehammer to all of the sacred cows and every stupid and ridiculously illogical, inconsistent, and dishonest view that there is out there that tries to oppose the conclusive argument of Israel only. Israel only with an AD 70 terminus is in fact the correct view and can be the only view. Whether the texts were written pre-70, whether the texts were written in 70, whether they were written 100 years after 70, it doesn't matter. They are clearly referring to the fall of Jerusalem, the end of the age, the destruction of the mother of all harlots, and the salvation of God's chosen people once and for all. And so there is no argument with that. And I know that I possess the power, right? I have the power. And so I want to present this in more clear and logical ways. And I also want to demonstrate this view up against dishonest views, up against fools who may think that they have a counter argument. I would love to present this against you. I'm looking for people that have a little bit of a following, right? I don't want to go debate, what was his name? Joel Saxon. Was it Joel Saxon? What the heck's his last name? I don't know. There was a Joel guy on Facebook years ago. Hopefully he's still alive. He was a pretty rough character, but a good kid at heart, but he just came from a tough background, always slipping in and out of, drug and alcohol addiction, and then coming back to his, Calvinistic reform teachings, and it was just quite bizarre. But I don't want to debate people like that. I want to debate somebody that has a little bit of a following, that someone thinks may possess a valid argument against Israel only, and so far there's been none. I went up against Daniel in a discussion, Daniel Rogers, who has a little bit of a following, who has since renounced his full preterist belief. And that happened as a result of our discussion, by the way. Thank you very much. Just deconverting people one by one. But anyway, these are the types of engagements and discussions that I'd like to have. So when I was on Facebook a few months ago, when I did have a lull in time, I jumped on there as a name called Char Patterson, just to kind of mess with people a little bit and have a little bit of fun during my down season while I was planning the project, which a lot of times is much less hands-on. And it just, coincided with a nice 6-month chunk of, downtime. And so I was able to kind of jump back into the fray a little bit, ruffle some feathers, if you will, and have a gay old time, as they say. And during that time, I noticed the dishonesty is at an all-time high. I also noticed that there's many people that are actually genuinely interested in Israel only. It's not just a brush under the rug view that people make it out to be. So anyway, it was fun. Had some engagements with people. Got pissed off by a few people as well, because I'm a very authentic person, and I don't like liars. I don't like dishonest fools. I don't like people who try to blackmail people. So I challenged certain people to certain things, and nobody accepted. I publicly challenged Don Preston to a discussion on any topic, no holds barred, no silly debate, what do you call it, format. Just a one-on-one, mano y mano, mano y mano, however you prefer it. Discussion, right, between two obviously pretty well-off biblical minds, one elderly and up there in age and wisdom, the other sort of a young buck, if you will, although my back hurts every day. And we could just have a good time and talk about it. But he did not want anything to do with it, not even a peep. Daniel Rogers got thrown into the mix. Daniel I think kind of got backed into a corner and had to play this game of, oh, I'm not afraid, I'll jump on there. But obviously, if you watch that discussion, you know it went pretty badly for Daniel. And I didn't even prepare. Now, people will say, oh, you know, you had questions. Sure, I did. Because I knew we were jumping into a 3-hour discussion, and I didn't want to just freeball it, right? I wanted to come out there with some sort of direction for the discussion. I knew that it wasn't going to be restricted to any kind of format, which is great. That's how I prefer it. But I had questions for Daniel. I wanted to know how Daniel dealt with the most difficult, most inconsistent, illogical, just wackadoodle, banana sandwich conclusions that full preterism and Christianity as a whole come to. And so I asked him these questions because, remember, I don't get to ask big names these questions. I had to take advantage of that opportunity, especially being that there were hundreds of people watching. Right. And so I did so, and some people loved it and some people hated it. Right. And the people that hated it realized that, well, they think anyway, that if Daniel was more prepared, he would have had different answers. Well, he may have had some different answers, but they would have all been equally wackadoodle. Okay. Because the questions that I ask are bone crushing. They end you. Okay. And that's why IO is still growing. And so anyway, I'm ranting right now, but the point of my jumping back on here is this video that came up, and it was sent to me literally yesterday, folks. I'm not even kidding you. It is Sunday morning at 8 a.m. I'm on my way to the project. I'm going to be doing some work there today and meeting a couple subcontractors. And I just decided, you know what? Nice, easy morning, not meeting anybody for a few hours. I'm going to stop by my office and just rant for a little while. And I'm going to listen to this video that was sent to me just yesterday. Now, if you think I'm lying, ask Michael Barris, because he's the one, my good friend Michael, who sent me this video link and said that this is on tomorrow. This was less than 24 hours ago. Let me take a swig of this Joe. And he sent me this link. And so my initial response was, dude, I'm slammed. I was in the middle of building a concrete column and putting a mailbox in the ground. And I'm getting this text that says, debunking Israel-only preterism with Derek Lambert of Mythvision from Cross Bible Live YouTube channel. And it's scheduled for that day. And so I said, all right, I'll check it out. I said, but honestly, he mentioned I should do a rebuttal. And so I said, okay, I'll take a look at it. I'll see what I can do. I said, but it might be a few months because, you know, I do a lot of the finished work, and we're in that phase right now on a very large home. So, you know, it takes time, and any extra time that I have, I put towards that. So it's very hard. But then, you know, he accepted that and was like looking forward to it and all that. And I said, okay. As the day went on and I was getting ready to leave, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to throw this thing on for the drive home and just listen to it. So I put it on and I was listening. Now, mind you, the first 50 minutes or so is just pure rant, right? I mean, this guy, Steven Nelson, I don't know who he is. I still have not listened to this. All right, that's what I'm getting to here. Steven Nelson is the host. Derek Lambert's the guest. And they're supposedly debunking Israel-only preterism. So for the first half hour, there's this mumbo-jumbo about this, I don't know, translation program and all this like wicked, geeky, nerd-out stuff, right? So do yourself a favor and just skip right through the first 30 to 40 minutes of this thing. Okay, it's a total waste of time. I listened to some of it just in case there were any tidbits or firebacks about I.O., and there I don't think there were. I will admit that I did have to fast forward for a good amount of it because it's absolutely brain-numbingly nerdy. And that's cool. If that's your thing, I'm not dogging you for it. But for me personally, I don't have the time to listen to that. So we get to like around minute 40. Derek starts going into maybe 45 minutes. Derek starts going into his history, coming from all his different backgrounds. Now, I know Derek. I've known Derek for a while. Derek and I, and he will admit this, are a lot like two brothers that just pretty much can't stand each other, but at the same time have some respect for each other. And that's just how it's been through the years. I remember Derek back on YouTube when I first came to Christianity back in maybe 2012 to 14, something like that. And Derek was like a Jebediah-looking person, right? He had that beard. He looked like an Amish boy. And if you look him up on YouTube, you can see him. He's like, you know, straight out of the friggin' barn churning butter. and he's a Calvinist, staunch Calvinist, right? Just teaching it, preaching it, loving it. And, that's who he is. He gets passionate about certain things. And so he's had his journey. He's come from that. I was a Calvinist at one point, too. I still am in many respects, but under the Israel-only paradigm, because, of course, I understand that God in the last days is sovereignly plucking out his elect, his chosen, his called. He's not destroying the region yet, because he's long-suffering, and he's waiting so that each one of them would come to repentance and that all Israel would be saved, which, of course, was the mission that he came for when he said he only came for them. So anyway, Derek's gone through all these things, these different views, as have I. Derek went off on his own journey into mythicism, which is great. He's got a Mythvision podcast on YouTube, which is, I guess, successful for him, and I'm happy for him. He clearly wanted that path in life, and he, soaked a lot of time into different entertainment, concepts and things. And finally, it looks like he's doing well on the Mythvision stuff. I would hope, right? I mean, because he's got to be putting a lot of time in too, right? With sitting with all these PhDs and just listening to them ramble. I mean, if that's your thing, cool, right? Again, for me, not so much, but good for him, right? So here he is, though. He's going through his journey. He's talking about how he was basically excommunicated. And then when we get to, I'm just sparing you the first roughly hour, because it's really just non-Israel only stuff. If you really want to see some engagement between he and I, which I'm going to do here for a little while today, you can skip forward to around minute 53. If you put it at minute 53 and let it play, you'll see basically where they actually mention me as their first sort of intro into the IO view. The host mentions me, which kudos to him, because they don't do that a lot. If you notice, Derek doesn't like to mention my name on his channel anymore, and he'll say, "Oh, I had you on my channel." Of course you did. You had me on my on your channel before you realized that the view was a formidable, logical, conclusive juggernaut. Okay, that's when you had me on your channel. And I've offered to go back on his channel. I've hinted towards it and still haven't gotten the invite. And that's cool. We can get there eventually. And I would want to do that when I'm in prime shape, although I feel pretty damn good right about now. But anyway, so Derek doesn't like to bring up my name. And a lot of these anti-IOers do not like to bring up my name. Now, I don't know if it's a insecurity thing where they feel like they're going to throw people towards my channel and they're going to listen and, become compelled to continue to listen. I don't know if it's something to do with that or if it's just pure bitterness because, what he's soaked his entire life into understanding. I've explained simply, clearly, cohesively, logically, using common sense, logic, allowing words to mean what they mean. And not so much worried about where did these things come from, or who wrote them, or this is a conspiracy, or this is forged. None of that, right? I'm looking at what the text says. And that's what's always driven me to the end zone, right? To get the touchdown, is that I only look at what the text says and I do not get distracted by outside noise. And when you do that, when you can put those blinders on, the only thing you'll see at the end is Jesus saying, "I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Okay, and you see that mission unfolding in amazing ways. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to stop ranting. That was my intro. Had to give a little intro. I am going to do one of my classic engagement videos. I'm going to probably do a few of them because this is long. The video is long, and I've not listened to any of it yet. I'm literally at the part where they jump in and start talking about me. So I'm hoping, and I'm assuming that this is going to flow right into some anti-Israel only rhetoric, and I'll be able to grasp and engage in that rhetoric and give you guys some food for thought, give you my perspective, which I think is clear, logical, doesn't force things, and really just goes back to the foundation of the Bible, right? The Bible's a book for a reason, right? This is how I view it. The collection of writings that are contained in that book we call the Bible is there for a reason, right? Now, I don't believe it's true. I don't believe this stuff happened in real time history. Maybe some of it did, but I think it was wildly exaggerated. I think it was, put in a collection by certain individuals, probably corrupt, and it's there for a reason. And I do believe that the end relates to the beginning. I really, really do believe that. because the end is fulfilling promises, hopes, goals, prophecies, all these things that we find in the beginning of the story. The end is actually checking off one by one, and in a creative and fun way. It's going through the one by one and just saying, all right, promise to Abraham that in your seed many nations will be blessed. Check, right? Promise to Ephraim, your descendants shall become a multitude of goyim, right? Here's Paul looking for a fullness of nations in the end. Check, right? So we go through all this and we see this beautiful fulfillment taking place. So therefore, the book has to have been constructed in a way that it is, or in the way that it is. So anyway, let's listen, and I'm going to engage in some of these points. I'll be playing and pausing the video, and I'll be pausing it at points where I feel I need to interject and add some of my commentary. And this is an interactive, good way to really see one argument up against the other, right? I feel like this is a really solid way to do critique, right? Exegetical critique or whatever it may be, is to listen to the person's arguments and pause and address them one by one. Because when you let someone rant, and Derek can rant, right? If there's one person who can rant more than me, it's Derek. Derek can rant and go on tangents and talk about all kinds of stuff and totally miss the forest for the trees, right? And it's easy to forget all the stuff that's being said. So I like to pause it and take a moment to look. So let me take a swig here. I have my computer here, so just in case I have to pull up a text or two, let me just pop my little Passerooski in here. Hope everybody's doing well out there, by the way. I get fired up about this shit, but I love it. I truly do love it. I love the Bible. I love reading it. I love putting the pieces together. I do believe in God, so I'm not one of those. I'm not an atheist. I'm not even an agnostic. I'm just a full believer in a God, a great creator, a sovereign being. And I know what that sovereign being has done in my life. So anyway, we're going to jump right in here. And let's have a look-a-rooski.
In a nutshell.
In the description, I have a few key links, and just for people that want more background on Israel only, because that's what we're here to talk about, right?
Yep.
That's what we decided to talk about today. And if you look at one of those links is the interview you did with Jason DeCosta, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, was that the first time Israel only was discussed on your channel?
I don't know if it was the first time it was discussed. I think I discussed it with James, Creating Christ.
No, that's wrong, by the way. So that was the first time it was discussed on his channel. There was no video made towards Israel only. There was no title made about Israel only. There was no discussion or content about Israel only on Derek's Mythvision channel. What happened with Valiant and Creating Christ was I slaughtered that sacred cow by going back and forth with some of Valiant's content, but that came after the fact, right? I had already engaged on Lambert's channel and presented a 2-hour synopsis, if you will, of the Israel-only viewpoint, and this was after. Valiant was responding to me, right? And they'll say they'll scoff and say, "Oh, he wasn't responding to you. Valiant's a scholar." Well, he was responding to my view. Does that make it better? So Valiant was responding towards Israel only because of what I presented. The discussions that took place on that channel were because of what I presented. Had I not presented, they wouldn't be having those discussions. So let's just get that clear. That's a error in the time frame by Lambert.
James, his last name is not coming to my mind right now. He's a friend of mine. So forgive me if you see this. We covered this. We were kind of debating it.
Wait, did he just say he doesn't know James Valiant's name? He said he's a friend of his, but he forgot his name. James. It's James Valiant, right? Like, really? This is what I mean. When you go through different views, Derek was pretty on fire for that Creating Christ, and some of you listening were too. I remember Rob Shannon, and he still reaches out to me from time to time. Rob's a good guy, but he was a big Creating Christ guy until I had to talk him out of it because it just makes no sense, right? So a Roman created this story about Israel being saved, right? It makes no sense. So anyway, let's continue.
And arguing against it, and it creates like, we're talking about like locker room talk, guys, like this kind of back and forth. And then finally I'm like, come on the channel, let's hear your position, because I'm not like,
He's talking about me, by the way.
Hear everything, dude. I'm open to hearing any and all positions, as long as I'm like, I filter stuff, bro. I hear enough when I know something's so out there. I get emails, you should let me on, because I can tell you how Tesla actually was a reincarnation. I mean, like, when you hear that, bro, you can't entertain stuff like that. At some point, you got to go, dude, that's not my kind of channel. I'm looking for serious, actual truth, not weird stuff like that. But he came on, presented it, we're cool, but I'm not buying it. I just didn't buy the conclusion. I think there's a lot I've learned over the years, though, from Israel only, that made me see why they see things the way they do. But I guess we should probably define what it is for the world. Yeah, Valiant. Someone said James Valiant. That's
because this was old school. This was like 2019 of you talking to like a picture of Jason DeCosta.
Yep.
And
damn good picture too, if I might say so.
That was one of the videos that you sent me, I think, early on to say, hey, you got to get into, you got to look into this. And I think the reason you were tagging me and inviting me into the group, I'm not going to play any of this. I think the reason was that you wanted my perspective on the Greek stuff. Right?
Yeah, because you, dude, very few people do I know who get into the weeds. And when I would approach academics that I had started to be.
So first of all, let me just say something about this Greek stuff. So apparently this Stephen Nelson guy might be some kind of Greek expert, and that's totally fine, right? I have my own Greek expert. That's the biblical translations that I've studied A to Z, right? So I don't need to hear from some American who knows a little bit of Greek, Koine Greek, whatever you may call it. I got the text, right? I have the translations. I can do the work on my own, right? And this is what we all should be doing as students of the Word. We should be doing the work on my own. So I don't need this man to tell me that the term Hellene means a Greek, right? Or it could be someone who was converted to Greek beliefs and ideologies. And yeah, I don't need that, right? I understand that, okay? But that doesn't affect Israel only in the slightest bit, right? Israel only's predicated on early promises that Israelites, descendants of the 12 tribes, pure bloodline, literal descendants of the 12 tribes, specifically the tribe of Ephraim, would become, or aya melo goyim, right? In the Hebrew, meaning a fullness of nations, a multitude of various nations, right? That's Israel being promised to become a fullness of nations, a aya melo goyim, right? If that's how you pronounce it. Forgive me if it's wrong. I don't care. And here we have Paul using that same term, the only other time in the entirety of Scripture. Now, mind you, he's using that term as he's seeking the elect, right? It's not just that Paul uses the term melo agoim or haya melo goyim, right? It's not that he uses that. It's that he uses that in conjunction with this obscure mission that they're on to seek the elect from the farthest corners of the earth, right? Paul was on a mission for the elect just as well. And this is what people miss, right? Paul is preaching, looking for the elect. As many as were appointed to eternal life in the crowd that Paul preached to in Acts they believed, it says. So Paul is seeking Israel, right? Paul says that many times, and we can get into that more. And obviously, if you followed me, you know that. He says it verbatim. Peter says that Paul wrote to all the children of Israel in all of his epistles, speaking in them of these things, right? So Peter reveals who Paul's audience was in his epistles, right? So I'm using a foundational perspective. I'm not using I know some Greek, so therefore I understand the New Testament. No, okay? I have access to that information just like he does, right? I don't need to know how to read Greek, right? I can read the translations, okay? And so the point is that if we're not allowing the foundation of the story to determine how we interpret the end, we're way off. We're way off. And that's what Christianity is. It's way off. Christianity actually believes that they are the fullness agoyim that is being saved in the end, as a certain group was being called out from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred so that all Israel could be saved. Right? They believe that they're them. And they're completely ignorant that there's a promise in the Old Testament that Israel's descendants would become a fullness melo agoyim. Okay? So, this is the problem. All right. So the whole, oh, I'm a Greek expert, I'm a this, that, I'm a mythicist, I'm a scholar. I mean, I'm sure Derek's going to say, words like scholars and scholarly consensus and majority of scholars. That's going to come out a lot in this video. I'm pretty sure of it, because that's his world. That's who he interacts with. That's who he relies on. But IO doesn't need scholars, right? IO is looking at what the text says. IO can go get its information, right? We live in a very different world now where we don't need scholars. We can read the works and the proof and the evidence. We can go back. We can read the historical accounts. We can see the day and the type of environment that it was back then. We can see that. Okay, we don't need these experts.
Befriend. They don't have the time for me to just send them this project and say, hey, there's 800 verses these guys are using systematically. They have like a
way more than 800, but yes,
systematic way of systematizing the conclusion. And let me just give my personal, there is different versions of what they call Israel only, but you have to first understand the preterism part, and then we have to explain the fact of what they're trying to conclude, okay? For the audience, just if you're coming across this for the first time, full preterism is ultimately all prophecy fulfilled. All biblical prophecy is fulfilled. Specifically, coming from a Christian context, is saying that the second coming happened. The resurrection happened. All of this was past.
Okay, yes, Derek, spot on. Bang. Full preterism. Game over. Bob Backlund, crossface chicken wing, Undertaker, tombstone pile driver right into the middle of the tarmac. Right? Is that what you call it? Tarmac? That might be at an airport. I don't know. Anyway, ring. We'll call it a ring. This is what full preterism does to Christianity. It body slams it into oblivion, okay? And what full preterism does is it eliminates any arguments to seep out, right? It's this border. It's this impenetrable, southern wall, if you will. And what it does is it keeps everything tight and in check and doesn't allow people to jump over the fence, right? If they jump over the fence, they get whipped. They get electrocuted, right? That's what happens with this full preterism stuff. And that's what happened to me. I understood full preterism for what it is. It's a conclusive 80-70 terminus, right? It's over, right? It took a little while to get there because you hold on to things and you don't want to give up things. But ultimately, honesty and logic will win. It should anyway, right? Because we can't, if we're truly being authentic and genuine with ourselves, we cannot allow dishonesty to win, right? We have to go with where our gut tells us to go. And when you see that Jesus was saying that he was in the last days, that Paul confirmed it, that Peter wrote about it, that James said they were at the door, that the writer of Revelation said that any moment this was going to happen. When we couple that with Jesus's imminent time statements, like this generation shall not pass until all these things that I just talked about in the Olivet Discourse take place. When we see Jesus say that some standing here shall not die before they see me coming in my kingdom, right? To reward each one according to his works. That's the final judgment. That's Jesus coming for the final judgment before some of them standing there would die. Again, encapsulating it within the generation. When we see Jesus say that to the disciples that they shall not finish preaching through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man come. Again, another time indicator, another clear, logical, reasonable statement made by this Jesus figure that this is going to take place before you die. Okay? And so all these things are lined up in the New Testament. I mean, we're talking, somebody did a spreadsheet back in the day. It was like 200 reasons why the New Testament is preterist, a full preterist, or something like that. And it just had endless examples, right? And obviously I have them all in my noggin, but some people have them all broken down. So if you ever get a chance to go and look at some of those, do so. And the thing about full preterism proof text is that everybody has proof text, right? Every view has a text that they can go to and say, oh, look, but it says a day is like 1,000 years here. And, they have all these like comebacks, right? But the one thing that full preterism has is clear time statements, okay? Clear, irrefutable. You cannot argue them. They are set in stone. They are concrete. They make sense to the human mind. Time statements. And when you have time statements, it's a huge game changer. The implications of clear time statements are massive in the New Testament. The clear time statements imply that Jesus was coming within one generation, within the lifetime of those standing there, that they and they alone were living in the last days, that was the wicked and last generation of the tale, and that Christ would come, the dead would be raised, the living would be changed, they would be caught up together in immortal bodies and been taken to a place called heaven, aka a New Jerusalem, where there would be no more pain, tears, sorrow, and death. That was all on the cusp of happening. And it was all going to coincide with this final judgment upon Jerusalem. And that's why this Jesus points to the temple and says not one stone will be left unturned. He's anchoring the final judgment and resurrection in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Okay? Plain and simple. There is no defeating that argument. I don't care who you are. Okay? If I wanted to invest time in being a full preterist defender, I would maul people, right? Like a freaking polar bear blended with a grizzly bear, blended with a liger, right? That's a lion-tiger combo. That's how bad I would maul people in the full preterist argument. But that doesn't interest me, okay? Because common sense and logic should win out, right? We're past that. We're moving beyond the time statement, common sense, and logic. Now we're wondering, if there's a terminus, if there's a conclusion, then why wouldn't there also be a conclusive fullness of individuals who were also participating, right? Does it make any sense for a resurrection to occur, but more people somehow be involved after that? A final resurrection, a final judgment, a final inheritance, a final coming, a final catching away to heaven, a final inheritance of a new city, but yet that story continues somehow in the here and now in the earthly realm. It doesn't make sense, okay? I started thinking about the who, okay? Not so much the when. The when was already solved, but the who, okay? And if I say that another time, you're going to think I'm an owl, but I focus on the who, okay? And the who ultimately had to be contextual. It had to be specific. It had to be targeted. It had to be Israel only, okay? And that stems from what I said earlier about the promises that we find in the beginning. So anyway, I can go all day, right? This stuff is fascinating to me, and I'm just addicted to common sense. But let's get back to Derek here.
It already happened. Now, within this are phrase of various forms of full preterists. Some are idealists. Some are individual body view. Some are corporate body view. They don't like each other, okay? It's like every cult in the world that splinters and doesn't like each other. And then they argue, and then they splinter, and then there's a splinter within that. It's just human nature. But out of full preterism, when you know the end had to happen then, you reinvestigate and go, how do I deal with this 144,000?
Okay, so he's kind of getting into what I just ranted about. He's talking about, how full preterism leads to more questions, and it should.
Here, how do I deal with Isaiah's prophecy or Jeremiah's prophecy, specifically talking about a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah? Gentiles aren't mentioned there. There's no other people.
Well, first of all, let me just lay one thing to bed here. Okay, let me tuck it in nicely. Jeremiah, Isaiah, these are not prophecies about AD 70. Okay, you can argue that all you want. Okay, but here's what's really happening. Jeremiah is a Babylonian captivity prophet. Isaiah is also much of the same. Now, whether he wrote before, after, doesn't matter. Again, we're not worried about the why or how or who, or we're worried about what does the text say. Okay, Jeremiah is a self-proclaimed Babylonian captivity prophet. And if you don't understand that, you need to read the book of Jeremiah. He's dealing with the Jews in captivity for 70 years in Babylon. Okay, he's a prophet to them. Okay, he's not prophesying about AD 70. Okay, now, the prophecy that these prophets make about there'll be a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah is the prophecy about them coming back from Babylon. 100%. I could prove that easily. Jeremiah links Nebuchadnezzar. He links the Babylonians. It's all in the same discourse. And that promise is linked to that return. Period. Okay, you can argue that all you want. It is. Okay. The New Testament is using that common theme. What theme? The theme of God restoring the two houses of Israel. Okay? And it's doing what it often does. It's quoting Old Testament but using it in a new way. Okay? Same theme, same motif, same God saving Israel, same God restoring the houses of Israel. It's all the same. But the New Testament is not saying so much that Jeremiah was speaking about AD 70. The New Testament is using the same terminology that Israelites would understand, that being prophecies of old, and he's applying it to the AD 70 modern day. Okay? So when he says there'll be a new covenant with the house of Judah and the house of Israel, he's again using that same theme in AD 70. But that does not negate the fact that Jeremiah's prophecy was about the return from Babylon. Okay? Period. Isaiah as well. The new heaven, new earth of Isaiah 65 and 66 is not what Don Preston says. It's not a spiritual donkey, right? There's not spiritual donkeys flying through the air and, kids playing in the spiritual streets and eating spiritual fruit from the spiritual trees and the walls being spiritual rebuilt on the spiritual Jerusalem. No, it's not that. Isaiah literally saw a new city in his future. And of course he was probably, writing post hoc, but he's proclaiming that restoration, that rebuilding. And in that, he calls it a new heaven, new earth. In that, he makes many promises that are contained to the earthly realm. And of course, Isaiah was a prophet during the time of this same period that Jeremiah was. Whether before, after, who knows, right? Nobody knows. We can all make theories. We can all take guesses. But Isaiah was writing about that same new heaven, new earth, where they would again return to the rebuilt city, rebuild the walls, rebuild the temple. They would play in the streets. They would sing. Children would laugh, and they would die at 100 years old because of blessing and prosperity. And this is the focus of the prophets, not AD 70. Okay, the New Testament uses those old motifs, those old phrases like heaven and earth, new heaven and new earth. So when John sees this new heaven and new earth of Revelation, again, he's not so much saying that Isaiah 65 is coming to fulfillment. John is using Isaiah 65 language to say that something similar is taking place. God is once again restoring Israel. Will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Was the question in Acts 1, by the way. Okay, that was the lead-off question in Acts chapter 1 as Jesus was about to ascend to heaven, and they were basically like, what in the hell is going on right now?
In the New Covenant mentioned in the Old Testament prophecies. So I must admit, this is my perception of the Israel-only origin of where I think it came from. Most people probably don't know the historical record here. There were two guys.
This is great because finally I can put some clarity to this history or this historical record of Israel only, right? There's all these views, there's all these rumors about how Israel only started. So let's listen to Derek's rendition, and then I'll give you guys the actual rendition, okay?
Historically, when all this first happened, I'm a full preterist. I heard about this guy, they called him Rivers of Eden. He goes way back. Yeah. He was under the IBV, the individual body view cult version, okay? He was convinced with this other guy, Donald Hockner, two dudes, who were looking into Christian identity, which is another kind of Christian British Israelitism. You can see this, you've mapped all this out over the years, okay? All this, they saw an interpretation from British Israelites, Christian identity, which is pretty out there in terms of like most Christians don't accept this stuff. And you actually find this in Black Hebrew Israelites or Hebrew Israelitism today. Yeah. Certain versions of it where Gentiles, the Goy are not, in the covenant. They're not, salvation is not for them. What happened was Donald Hockner and Rivers of Eden found those aspects convincing or interesting and ran with this interpretation, and they started pioneering this idea. And I believe Jen Fishburne was somewhere around this getting introduced to the idea, but wasn't sold completely on this, and would always say, I'm 95% Israel. I never knew what that meant when we would try to pin it down.
So first of all, let's back this up for a second. So Rivers of Eden has nothing to do with I.O., right? Rivers had nothing to do with the boom of I.O. He had nothing to do with its explosion. Rivers of Eden and a guy named Corey Schultz, to be exact, were the two initial, talkers of something that looked like I.O., okay? Now, if you know anything about their positions, they're way different than proper IO, which is what I present on Consistent Preterism. They're way different, right? I don't even believe that they think that the Gentiles were Israelites. I know at one point they certainly didn't. Perhaps I've convinced them. But they, I believe that there was just this group of random Gentiles that got saved as well. And that's the understanding that I had. But anyway, Rivers of Eden and Corey Schultz were in a couple of very tiny Facebook groups in the beginning, right? There was nobody talking about this stuff. Nobody. They certainly made no content. They didn't teach it. They have no writings. They have no proof that they did anything for the view other than kick around a few posts. Hey, what about this? I think this guy's an Israelite, or, whatever the case may be, right? Now, this happened probably within the 10 years or so prior to me coming to Israel only, maybe, something like that, right? So they technically were putting out ideas the 10 years leading up to when I came and understood Israel only in my own way that I feel is way more logical. And so anyway, they sometimes get credit for I.O. And I know that Corey Schultz has actually told people that he taught me everything, right? Like, I learned everything from him. I wasn't even friends. This is the comical part. I didn't even know these guys. I had no social media connection, no tie to them. I was not in those groups, right? I knew of the groups. I didn't know what they shared. I had no interest. I was a, 20-something-year-old, whatever, just living life, right? And so I was busy. I didn't care, right? That wasn't my prerogative. I had a website at the time that it was like Kingdom Now or something. It's no longer up there. But I had my own stuff going on. So I wasn't part of this. But I think, one of the groups might have been called like IO Terminus or something like that on Facebook. And it had 200 to 300 members. But from what I understood is that this position of Israel only was just not even worth talking about, right? Nobody talked about it. And I was in some of the larger preterist groups. And even in the Christian groups prior to coming to preterism, when I was a, futurist and then partial preterist, nobody talked about it. I never heard of people about Israel only, right? Now Derek just went into this British Israelitism and this Black Hebrew Israelitism. I mean, those are very, very, very silly, viewpoints that take a very personal approach to the scriptures and disregard logic, common sense, time statements, audience relevance, all basic fundamental principles of knowledge, right? So those aren't even to be taken seriously. But my position of Israel only, which I call consistent preterism, is that there was a terminus in AD 70, and it involved a very specific group of individuals. And it's rooted and founded in the core promises that we find at the beginning of the Bible. And it's talked about, it's speculated upon, it's imagined, it's hoped for, it's longed for, all throughout the story as this chosen people is being followed with the camera. And then when we get to their last days, we have this glorious fulfillment of these promises coming to fruition through the ingathering of the Goyim, the fullness of nations, so that all Israel could be saved, as Paul said in Romans 11.
But sounds like
I'm not convinced that she even knows what she means when she said.
Oh, the Jen Fishburne thing. Yeah, Jen Fishburne was not IO when I became IO. Let's just say that for sure. Jen Fishburne was not IO when I became IO. Jen Fishburne wrote maybe a document, and this is, who can verify this, right? Nobody can verify this, because she can put a date on a document, and she'll share a PDF and say, oh, look what I wrote 18,000 years ago. It's like, yeah, okay, but you put the date. You wrote the date, right? So anyway, Jen Fishburne, when she saw what was happening with my version of IO, how it was expanding, how people were talking about it, how people were sharing ideas, and a lot of people were agreeing with some of the stuff I was sharing. Jen Fishburne immediately started to take credit for what IO was and where it came from, and referred to this paper that she wrote, and then she puts up a conference that she talked about. But remember, Jen Fishburne's still a Christian, right? During all of this supposed time, Jen Fishburne's still a Christian, so clearly she wasn't IO. Right? Proper IO understands who Jesus came for because he said it. But she wasn't truly IO, right? And maybe that's why Derek said she was 95%, something like that, I think he says. I don't know. But regardless, you're either IO or you're not, right? Israel only is an exclusive view, right? You can't not be. Now, you can take the view that some do that, somehow Jesus is still the creator, or he's still the God, or Yahweh is still God, and Jesus is still your savior in some sense. But that seems a little inconsistent if we're going by what the text says. You can also just say that story had nothing to do with you. If you want to take a more textually honoring perspective and position, you could go that route, which some folks have done. It doesn't pertain to me, no, but I can still learn from it. I can still worship that God. That's fine, right? Okay, cool, right? Like, you and I have no issue if that's you. It's the people who are deliberately dishonest and who fire shots at me and fire shots at IO without the proper ammunition, right? If you're going to come at the big dog, you got to come with ammunition, right? So again, I'm going straight off the cuff. This is just what I do. So anyway, let's continue here.
I don't know. I'm not going to try and put I'm not trying to be derogatory or negative or anything. Yeah. I'm just trying to be honest of how the engagements went over the years, and eventually a new era arose where young bucks who had louder mouths.
Notice Derek doesn't say my name. Again, he's talking about me, of course, young bucks who have louder mouths. I guess louder mouths. I mean, I'm on YouTube, right? So if I'm speaking at a louder decibel, perhaps, right? But no, it's just young bucks who had a passion for it. Young bucks who actually did the work, who put in the time. Young bucks like myself who put the videos out so that people could see the evidence. And now I have over 500 videos on my YouTube channel that hopefully people will go back to and sit and continuously challenge their beliefs, right? Some may be a little offensive, and, I was a kid. I still am a kid in many ways. I'm still a competitive guy, and I get fired up sometimes, and I deal with a lot of dishonesty. You got to understand, I'm not just someone who, talks to, a person and someone agrees with me. No, I have a controversial perspective, and sometimes that can cause friction in certain relationships, as you've seen. So anyway, I have a YouTube channel, and people were able to see the evidence, right? It's not that our voices were louder. It's that we actually I put in the time, the work, the effort, and then certain individuals who came after me put in the time, the work, the effort, and then it was this sort of domino effect where it just kind of branched out. And now, from what I saw in the Facebook groups, it's all anybody thinks about, right? It's all anybody talks about, right? I mean, look at the views on Tristan's YouTube channel. The views for the Israel-only content are about 4x the views of, sometimes 10x, the views of his average video, right? And that's not a knock on Tristan. That's just that they got to get with the program and get more people to challenge Israel-only, because it's clear that people are interested in it. It's clear that people understand it, and they go back to it to see if, how valid it is. And I think over time what happens is you eventually understand it more and more and more and more. When I step away from the Bible for a few months and then I come back to it, it makes 10x more sense to me, because it's like, holy cow, how can this not be about Israel, right? Why wouldn't this be about Israel? This is crazy.
And did not mind, bucking heads with the older IO guys. The IO guys were online. Two dudes arguing, debating on Facebook groups, and I was actually creating these Facebook groups.
Yeah, exactly. And Donald Hockner, who is a good guy. I like Donald. Donald was a old follower of mine. When he started listening to my content, well, I think Donald's deaf, but anyway, he used to ask for the closed caption version and stuff, and I couldn't always do it early on with YouTube. I don't know why. Maybe I was just dumb. But early on, he would ask for that, and he would email. And so Donald's a good guy. I like Donald. And I think Donald took a liking to me. But he since has kind of gone, quiet, dark, whatever. And we haven't talked in many years. But Donald was one of the originals. And Rivers and Corey, right? Those are the three names that really get kicked around. But there really wasn't a lot of information out there. They didn't do a lot for the movement, right? They had some views, some opinions, and they would chat about them in various private, small Facebook groups. Derek says he created Facebook groups. Let's see what he says about that.
Groups. I surrendered Facebook groups that had 2,000 and 3,000 people in them. I created them. I
don't know what he's talking about there. I don't recall there being a 2,000 to 3,000 Facebook group about Israel only, and content about Israel only.
excommunicated from these groups.
Yeah.
Dude, I can't help but keep getting excommunicated from everyone. In fact, recently on Mythvision, some people have excommunicated me again because I simply want to have conversations with PhDs because they have a different political stance and they want to take it to the full oomph. So at the end of the day, I just can't help but get in trouble, huh? Well, those new guys argued against those old guys. The new guys...
Well, I didn't argue against those old guys because my view was different than those old guys. See, I remember when I first came out with IO, when I came out of the IO closet, if you will, and I think I put it on Miano's channel. I think that was the first time maybe where Michael Miano, glory to God, brother, he had me on his podcast, and I gave a presentation, and Mike was cool enough to allow me to come on there and present it. And that kind of lit a little fire under my ass to get the content out there a little bit more because it flew off my lips, right? It wasn't like I had to try. And that's why I enjoy presenting it because it's just such a solid, logical conclusion that just makes sense, right? You don't have to force it. So I enjoyed that interview with Miano. And then right after that interview, Rivers of Eden, who that's his pseudonym, his real name, what the hell is his real name? Chris something, I think. Anyway, he started reaching out to me via email and was begging me to have a phone discussion with him because he heard my view. Now, remember, this is supposedly someone who mentored me and tutored me and gave me all the knowledge, right? But now suddenly he wants to reach out to me when he hears me come out with a podcast. Well, why was that? Well, that's because we had no connection. I had no link to Rivers of Eden whatsoever and zero link to Corey Schultz whatsoever. Zero. I was not in the same groups. We ultimately, Corey and I ended up in a group together and we clashed heads one time. One time in a Facebook group, we clashed heads and he ended up blocking me and that was the end of it. Never saw him again. That was the first and last time I interacted with Mr. Corey Schultz on Facebook. So all of these narratives about this guy teaching this guy and this guy, that, they're all false, right? Rivers of Eden reaches out to me to have a discussion saying, hey, I heard your podcast and I could probably pull see if I can pull these emails while we're sitting here. But reaches out to me and, wants to meet or not meet, but have a phone call. And so, I had heard of him, but very vaguely, didn't really know who he was. So we had a phone discussion. We had like a 2-hour call and, whatever. It was a decent enough phone call. But he expressed where he agreed. I remember explaining to him about my theory on Romans 5 and how that represents the law and how the tree of knowledge of good and evil represents the Mosaic law and that sin was in the world, but sin was not imputed without that law. So I explained the contextuality of the law in Romans 5 and 7 with him. And he was, I remember him saying that was interesting. He liked it. But anyway, we had a 2-hour discussion. And what I realized in that discussion is that we have very different opinions on certain things. One being, hold on, I'm just doing something on my email while I'm talking, but one being that he believed Genesis was literal, right? And that it was a literal creation of heaven and earth. Now, of course, I don't believe that. I believe that Genesis was a covenant creation. I don't go as far as I once did when I wrote my Genesis of Israel book, which is, I don't know. It's it's a book. It contains some good stuff on Adam. But I would be leery of some of the imagery stuff. Maybe I pushed that a little too far in that book. See, I'm willing and able to admit when I'm wrong or when I overstep. But I've never admitted that with Israel only because no one's been able to convince me otherwise. So anyway, bear with me. Just looking up something here. So anyways, yeah. Good stuff on Adam. But I remember having that discussion and, him commending me about Israel only. And that was the first time we ever talked. And then we kind of had some back and forth and, they kind of just got on each other's bad side. Let me see here. Yeah, I don't know. I'm getting distracted on these emails. Maybe I'll pull it up in a future one. But I do have emails from him. I just have to read them. But anyway, so he's emailing me for the first time. And that I have dated 2018, which makes sense. It was early 2018, so probably 2017 was when I came out of the IO closet and started producing content. But anyway, so these accounts of these people are usually pretty far-fetched, and the history doesn't match what they're claiming, right? The reality of it is that when I started sharing IO content, IO took off. Right, I had already had a decent enough following from writing my first book with Don K. Preston and being in preterist circles and this and that, and producing content on Facebook that people followed. I had that that small following that eventually pushed into a bigger following and got the attention of some of the full preterist leadership, if you will. And then of course I was cast away into heresy and all that, but I, when I came out and started sharing this stuff kind of blew up a little bit. But they're always going back to these older figures that nobody even knows, that there's no verifiable work from, not even a recording, not even a writing, right? Just one PDF from Jen Fishburne that she, dated for 12 years ago to make it seem like she was IO before me. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. So it's all nonsense, and I have to put it in its proper historical perspective.
Guys often accepted covenant creation, which
you have on the right side here, covenant Israel only, right? Yeah. Covenant creation.
Yeah, covenant creation's spot on, right? Genesis was a covenant creation. Genesis was not the creation of the world. Genesis was metaphor. Genesis was, symbolic, and Genesis is describing something in a very bizarre and apocalyptic type of way. And that's a creation of a covenant of God's people. And at the end is no different. The end is also a creation of a covenant, right? It's a new covenant. And so Genesis was the creation of the old. There's a promised land. There's blessing. There's God's relationship. There's fellowship. There's prosperity. There's, giving birth and being abundant. It's all there. And these are all constituent elements of God's relationship with Israel throughout the story that we find everywhere we turn. And so at the end, when we see there's a new covenant at the very end, and God's restoring them to a new Jerusalem, a new promised land made in the heavens without hands, that's exactly what's taking place. So covenant creation is correct, although some people push it too far. Some people apply it to themselves somehow. Some people say it's just an ongoing, it's kind of like this start to the story and they're still in the story. I mean, there's all kinds of views. But covenant creation in its pure, rawest form would just be that Genesis, whatever it is, whatever it's trying to say, is using symbolic language to portray God establishing his covenant with Israel, his chosen people, his man. And so that's basically all it is. And then at the end, we have this new covenant God makes with Israel again.
And this can get into the weeds, and I'm not going to, but ultimately they reinvestigate Genesis in light of the end happening. So no more tears, no more suffering. 2 Peter's talking about the elements shall burn up with fervent heat. Don Preston says that's the elements inside the Holy of Holies. Not actual elements.
And that's where they go too far, right? It's actual. It could be both. It could be either one. It works both ways. The elements burning up with fervent heat could seriously just be the elements of the earth in that local area, the elements of the temple. I mean, that's all going to burn, right? If that's how the city ended, that's exactly accurate.
Elements as in cosmology, which we've always thought, using like Persian ideas and others, like an actual cosmology, it's the temple of Israel. That's 70 AD. So what they did is they went back and went, I wonder if...
It's the whole region.
I wonder if, and they do use some scholarship to capitalize on this idea that Genesis 1 is packaged almost like temple theology in a sense. It is a cosmic temple that is being crafted and molded and formulated by the Creator. Then they get to stuff like the flood. This is a little radical, and I don't know if they all hold to this position, but the image tells you, okay?
Yeah.
That is Noah's flood, so to speak, in the sense that the waters represent nations. The waters that flooded Noah's ark were people, not actual water. They are people. The ark is the temple. And Noah is like a high priest within the temple, and the people of God are in there getting attacked by the nations. They could reinterpret a floating boat story with animals on it to animals meant not like the nations, some of the righteous nations. The righteous non-Israelite nations were the clean and the unclean animals that were inside the, like, bro, words stop meaning real words because you can find a place.
You need an interpretive cipher that you can use to decode the plain language of the text to uncover a hidden meaning. And once you think you see that, you can't unsee it.
Well, there is some hidden meaning in the Bible. Okay, the Jews and ancient Israelites used a lot of hidden meaning. There's things like the Kabbalah and the Zohar, which is the foundational text of the Kabbalah. It's this mysterious genre of Jewish mysticism, right? And it focuses on, understanding God and divinity, and it's just this mystical, mysterious stuff. So this is part of who the Jews were all the way into, the Middle Ages and probably even still today.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. And you would think if you're going to apply that here, then we should just go back to Gilgamesh. See how that works out with Utnapishtim telling the story of Enlil flooding the entire earth. Go check out the flood myths that this myth in the Bible is inspired in some way.
I have no issue with that. See, my view is pure, it's clean, it doesn't conflict with any of that. It can be saying anything, right? The Noah flood can be pulling from any Gilgamesh or whatever, ancient stories there were before. I don't have any issue with that whatsoever.
Genetically or indirectly, which is consensus scholarship, academics accept that Genesis is inspired from earlier motifs that come from the ancient Near East, Mesopotamia specifically. So anyway, words stop meaning words, but the point is you can see that they competed with the earlier model and the earlier guys just got silent. They just stopped. And they interpreted Genesis very literal. Those original guys were like it was...
Yes, they did.
Very literal. They came in with covenant creation and mixed it with this kind of, the whole goal about the Bible is only salvation for one people.
Yes, so they did get very upset about that. And I remember I actually found the first email from Rivers of Eden back in early 18. Hi, Jason. Donald Hockner gave me your email address. I was hoping I could give you a call sometime. I have some questions and would just like to get your perspective on how you think IO and covenant creation fit together. I'm not interested in a debate, but would just like to hear your perspective since we both have the IO part in common. Let me know if I can give you a call sometime. Thanks, smiley face Rivers. So that was the first ever interaction between Rivers and I. So anytime someone tells you that Rivers or any of them taught me what I know, just know that it's a complete crock of shit, right? It's just not true. This is the first communication that I've ever had with this man, and he emails me to tell me that Donald gave him my email, because like I had mentioned earlier, Donald and I communicated, and so he started the discussion with me. So anyway, let's get back here. What were we just talking about?
And no one else. Yeah. It's all about soteriology, using a theological term, salvation for Israel only. And Israel is defined as an ethnic, tribal, biological, genetic nutsack of Abraham. I always use that term.
Yes, exactly. So Derek's correct in his sarcasm, although he doesn't believe it. This is, in fact, what the story is doing, right? In Genesis, we have the creation of the covenant people. Bear with me one moment here. Sorry, just got a text there. But yes, he's correct. Genesis is the creation of a covenant people, okay, in its most symbolic form, right? It's describing this heaven and earth, this covenant creation, this putting of people in the garden, and it's describing this blessing, this protection, this relationship, in just an ideal and apocalyptic manner. And at the end, we have the restoration of that, right? But in a better sense, the restoration of all Israel, right? Of all the covenant, of all things, right? Is what we see taking place at the end. So clearly, if we hold to a full preterist perspective, and we know that the end was AD 70, and this new covenant was formed in AD 70, supposedly. However you think that happened, if you believe that, then you absolutely have to believe that Genesis is a creation of a covenant. Okay, it just has to be, right? Now, I've heard that some people make the argument that the beginning of Genesis was literal, and then like a few chapters in, when he goes to Adam, that turns and starts pointing towards Israel. Okay, that's fine if you want to take that view. That I don't care. As long as you have that the overall theme of Genesis is the creation of Israel's covenant and the establishment of them as a people, then we're cool, right? Because what do we ultimately have in Genesis, right? All we have in Genesis is this backstory of patriarchs that's leading forward until we come to the chosen people, right? It's just this period of 30 chapters, whatever it is, of Cain and Abel, and just going through the ranks. Noah, right? And then we're getting towards Abraham, and then all this stuff, Jacob, and then Moses. And so you're going through the ranks until you come to the 12 tribes of Israel. And Derek just made the sarcastic remark that it's not about, that Israel only thinks it's about, out of the nutsack, pure tribal deity. Well, that's exactly what it is. Because that's the foundation, right? The foundation doesn't talk about proselytes. The foundation doesn't talk about strangers, right? The foundation doesn't talk about any of that. The foundation is all pure Israelite, right? And what's happening in the final New Testament last days is that Israel is being restored to purity, right? This is what Revelation declares at the end, and nothing undefiled shall ever enter in. Because the end is going back to the beginning. Again, we have to remember this, right? The promise was made that Ephraim's descendants would become the fullness of Goyim, right? Ephraim's descendants. Now, what does descendants mean, right? Derek just made the argument that words have to have meaning. What does the word mean, descendants? Okay, does it mean that it's a spiritual descendant? Does it mean that they are descendants by way of converting to Judaism or the cult? No. Descendants means from the nutsack, to take the words out of Derek's mouth. It's kind of a weird way to put it. But anyway, nutsack. Okay? They come from the nutsack. They are pure Israelites. Okay, now you'll say, oh, that makes no sense. How could pure Israelites be coming back in the last days after years of assimilation and mixing with other different nations and nationalities? There's just no way. Exactly. Because the story is fiction. Okay? The story is not real. The story didn't happen. The story is an ideal picture, an ideal fulfillment of Israel's old promises that they loved and cherished and held on to for so long. That's what the story is doing. It's fulfilling that promise. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to work in the realm of, what we know to be true and possible here on planet Earth, right? People floating up to heaven in an ascended, glorified body does not fit with what we know to be reality here on planet Earth. People rising from the dead, walking on water, parting the seas, right? Healing the blind, turning rods into snakes, boarding an ark, building an ark with 3 dudes in the middle of the friggin' summer, right? For a massive flood. Like, these things don't happen on planet Earth. These are supernatural events. The resurrection of the dead ones, bodies rising from graves, right? So all this stuff is going on in the New Testament, which should give us an understanding, and the Old Testament, by the way, which should give us an understanding of what type of literature this actually is.
Forgive me for my language, but it's just what I've been saying for years. If you did not come from Abraham's seed, and you know what that means, literally, you are not in scope and never were and never will, and the end happened in 70. So you get this window from Abraham, practically, and Adam as a metaphor for, Israel. Like, they almost want to start the clock at Abraham. They don't really accept this.
You have to start the clock at Abraham. In fact, a lot of the Kabbalah-believing Jews do start the clock at Abraham, and some of them don't even start the clock at Abraham. They think Abraham's allegory and metaphor too, right? They don't believe, a lot of them don't even believe that they were real people, that they just represent the Torah. That's kind of the thinking in a lot of these, middle centuries from the Jews, who were a lot closer to the original thought than we were as well, I should say. So, the point here is that, there's a lot of allegory going on, and we're not understanding, really what it is, right? In fact, the whole story could be allegorical. We don't know. Paul in Galatians tends to hint in that direction when he says, that, Sarah and Hagar represent the two covenants, right? Okay, so if Sarah and Hagar represent the two covenants, then did Sarah and Hagar even exist? Right? He said these are allegory for the two covenants, right? Something in that manner. I'm not going to pull it up, but the passage I'm talking about. So is Paul there saying that these characters are allegorical for the Torah? I mean, that kind of seems to make sense. But anyway, so yes, there is a lot of conflict and debate on Adam, just like there is in Christianity. It's no different, right? He's scoffing and acting as if, some view has Adam figured out. No view has Adam figured out. But one thing that's probably true is that Adam did not exist in actual reality and talk to a talking snake in a tree and eat an apple because his naked wife, convinced him to do so. And then he was cursed, and then that curse went to all humanity. I'm sure Derek would agree that didn't happen in real history. So whether or not Adam represents Israel or Adam represents humanity, obviously the way that I swing on that. And I think that Adam's kind of a mixed bag. I don't really think that there's a clear-cut view on Adam. I think Adam's probably metaphor, probably symbolism. He's pictured as Israel's earliest father. He's sort of like a pre-Abrahamic figure. I don't know. But yes, Derek's right. The story, in my opinion, should start at Abraham. And we can look at Noah and all the earlier guys as forefathers, which writings like Tobit actually say Abraham was their forefather. So these are figures that are laid out in the timeline to set up the Israel narrative that's coming eventually.
70 nations material, giving that some credence later in the New Testament. They kind of want to start the clock there in Genesis 1 through 11. We can wiggle, How did Noah know about unclean and clean law?
Well, the 70, they're making the argument that the table of nations is who Paul is speaking of in the New Testament. And sometimes I wonder if Derek's still a Christian because he argues like a Christian. But the 70 table of nations is irrelevant. That has nothing to do with what's taking place in the New Testament. Again, I will repeat that the New Testament is a mission for elect individuals before the end came, right? It's not this, big glob of anyone who can come for all eternity. It doesn't picture that. The New Testament pictures an end, a terminus, and it's for a specific group of people who are being gathered in before that terminus. Okay, so that's what the New Testament is. And considering that we have these foundational promises, let me ask you a question. What's more important in the book of Genesis? Is chapter 48 right at the end when Jacob lays his hand on Ephraim's head in this most obscure exchange and promises that his descendants would become a fullness of nations, a melo agoyim? Is that more important than the vague mention of the table of nations in Genesis? I think it is, right? I mean, if you say no, then you're a bonehead, right? So that's way more important. But yet they want to argue that it's the table of nations whom Paul is seeking as he's looking for Israel, right? He said Jesus came to give repentance and forgiveness of sins to Israel. Paul said that. He's coming to give the forgiveness of sins and repentance to Israel because Israel was who needed repentance and forgiveness of sins.
Laws or right marriage laws and different, how did he have that when he didn't have the laws? That's how they try to argue. So, but
it's interesting that when you look at this chart, though, a lot of these, covenant Israel only and all this stuff, those are just we're talking about maybe, I don't know, a few dozen people who are really active, five people at the top that have each of them maybe 10 fake accounts, so they look like 50. And then,
so we can see the bitterness on behalf of the host here. What's his name? Stephen Nelson. So he just fired off some shots about IOers at the top. Now, I don't have 50 accounts. I can assure you of that. I had one pseudonym on Facebook that I used recently to kind of jump back into the fray a little bit and mess with people. But I'm the same person regardless if I'm him or not, right? But apparently he feels that IOers have multiple accounts. Now, Some may have multiple accounts, some don't. But I can tell you that as a sharer of IO content, I am constantly being engaged by people interested in IO, whether it's comments from 200 videos ago that come in every day or every couple days, or an email that I get, once a week, once every 2 weeks, or I had somebody call my phone once. I don't know how they did that, but I didn't even know them. And I was like, listen, dude, don't call my phone, right? They just don't do that. But anyway, a lot of people have reached out, and I can see the genuine curiosity. So they like to, again, brush it under the rug as something that's not important, but yet here we are still talking about it years later. More people now are talking about it. It's a real serious threat to not only full preterism, but also Christianity at large.
Oh, I don't know, maybe it's a few hundred spectators and people it's not as the on.
So I got about 2,400 subscribers on my YouTube channel. So whether they're probably not all spectators, my views certainly would say that not all of them engage, and that's fine. But a few hundred spectators, maybe. I don't know. It doesn't matter, though. What matters is when it's one-on-one and you're in the cage with the animal, what can you do to disprove it?
Top of this is the Black Hebrew Israelites, or just the Hebrew Israelites.
Yeah, I would say that, or the British Israelites would along with them, but I don't think they're as popular anymore.
They're not anymore, but they were the predecessors, and it's like the Black Hebrew Israelites really are the ones that get the attention of the apologists. Zach said, yeah, but the Israelites were known to repurpose things, so Noah's flood may be a metaphor for something else, without Gilgamesh being a metaphor for the same thing.
I would just there's obviously two flood stories in the Noah's flood story that are Israelite based. To me, it seems like a no-brainer. The same motif, the same repentance of the deity after trying to get rid of the humans. I think the difference is that ultimately one is for in one myth you have they're noisy. There is a version of that story, and it is not the popular one, where they're kind of sinful, they're bad, but they're noisy, and he eradicates them, whereas in the biblical text it says their hearts are continuously wicked. So there's a motif of getting rid of humankind for some reason, and they may differ for that reason to some degree, but yeah, I don't think they're that different. You know what I mean?
Now the thing that is really spawning, so to go back to British Israelism and Hebrew Israelitism, right? The idea is based on the historical timeline, right? That basically that there was a diaspora of northern Israelites who, in most scholarly opinion and according to the Bible, they were exiled by the Assyrians and sort of absorbed into the nations, sent east of the Euphrates, and basically just disappeared, right? We're talking about the 10 tribes, right? The 10 northern tribes.
Now let's see if this guy is honest enough to admit that right alongside of that disappearing, belief and that disappearing, mystery of the 10 tribes is also the belief that one day God was going to bring them back from the nations, right? So again, they're going to make the argument that, they're absorbed, they can't remain pure. But yet the argument is right there in black and white that God was going to bring them back, that he would call them back from the nations. So it's not my job to teach you or to explain to you scientifically how that's possible, right? It's my job to show you and reveal to you what the text is saying. And the text is saying that those 10 tribes are going to come back. God is going to call them back from all the places where he scattered them, right? In Deuteronomy 4, Moses tells the children of Israel that in the latter days, they're going to be scattered into the various nations, worshiping false idols, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, but God would remember the covenant promise that he made with their father Abraham, and he would turn and have mercy on them and call them back. Now, isn't that exactly what's taking place in the New Testament last days? Isn't God sending forth apostles and great messengers to bring this message to the nations of repentance and forgiveness of sins through Jesus Christ? That's exactly what's taking place. God is having mercy on them for their wicked deeds. God is sending Paul to Athens, where he finds some of them worshiping the unknown God, and he says we ought not be doing this because we are the offspring of God. We are Israelites. We are children of promise. So they repent and they come back to the fold, right? This is the mission that's going forth. And Paul is telling them in his epistles, like Galatians, saying that It doesn't matter if you're Jew, Greek, slave, free. Those are just various classes of people. That has nothing to do with ethnicity. But he says it doesn't matter if you're Jew, Greek, slave, free. If you're Christ, it's because you're Abraham's seed and an heir according to the covenant promise. So there it is. There's the tie. The covenant promise was made to Abraham that his seed, his descendants, would become a multitude of nations. They would become very numerous. And in his seed, in his descendants, many nations would be blessed. That's becoming a multitude of nations. That's the promise made to Abraham. So in the end, we have this mission that is fulfilling that these Israelites are scattered and they're being redeemed and saved from their sins. So these guys will make these arguments, but they're not realizing that they're self-defeating, okay? Because the text right alongside of this promises the restoration of these Goyim Israelites.
Appeared, went somewhere out there, and there were different phases of this, and it's represented in different sources, and Josephus quotes the Bible on this, and we have some sources we probably won't have time to get into because we are
that just says they are innumerably, and they're beyond the Euphrates, which is the drawing of these.
Exactly. There's plenty of sources. There's plenty of writings about the lost tribes of Israel. There's plenty of lore and tradition that we can see that they did believe this, no matter where they said they were. Right? It doesn't matter if they were over here. It doesn't matter if they were over there. The belief was, the commonality was that at one day, God was going to bring them back. And what's interesting is in Peter, when Peter's writing to the elect of the dispersion in the farthest countries, right? That's how he opens up his letter to the elect of the dispersion in Bithynia, all these different places. He says that of this salvation, the prophets have inquired carefully about the grace that would come to you. Well, what does that mean? It means exactly what I'm saying. This was the expectation. This was the hope. This is what they thought about meticulously and carefully, and they inquired about. And they searched the scriptures to see if it was so. It was the callback of the elect of the dispersed ones. And this was what Peter said was happening. They searched intently and carefully about the grace that would come to you. Who's the you? It's the elect of the dispersion that he's writing to in the far nations. The grace is coming to them. It's fulfilling everything that they hoped for and meticulously inquired about, thus fulfilling the promise that God would call Israel back from the nations and have mercy on them. Do you see how perfectly aligned I.O. is?
This image, they go east, not west, where Paul goes. So
again, the east-west thing is hilarity, right? It's just sheer hilarity. You're going to argue about the direction they went 2,000, 3,000 years ago? Okay. In a myth, right? It's not even that the direction argument is funny. It's just we're arguing about a myth and a direction in a myth.
You kind of have to ask yourself, why is Paul going?
And he's got this map on the screen with all these arrows pointing up to where they supposedly went. It's just, this is just comedy, right? There's all kinds of various opinions on where they went. There's all kinds of various statements. And Judaism as a whole, Second Temple Judaism all the way through apocalyptic Judaism and forward, is just a mixed bag of all kinds of different nonsense. So to say, they went here and they believe they went here is just nonsense because there was all different opinions.
Going west. It is a good question. You have to ask, but go ahead.
Yeah, and then of course you got the Roman diaspora, right? Like in the yellows. Like you have the Assyrian diaspora. These are coming from Wikipedia. So like the Assyrian exile in the red, you can see going east. The Babylonian exile goes to Babylon and then back, right? And then the Roman diaspora goes all over the place and then shoots up into Germany, and that's where you get the modern Jewish identities of the Ashkenazim,
the problem is all these different views and opinions don't understand time statements. They're all void of time statement clarity and logic, right? So all of them are nonsense. If they all just applied the time statements to their understanding, they would instantly all give up because they understand that it ended when it said it would. And it was pointed to the temple. When the temple fell, that was the end. Old Jerusalem falls and New Jerusalem in the heavens is received off its tail.
Sephardic Jews and the Mizrahic Jews, right?
Yep.
And so this is all something that, basically, if the Israel-only people were to redraw this map, they would have, read going everywhere. They thought like the northern Israelites were just going everywhere, and that they were all by the first century just coming back into the fold through Christianity, right?
I don't want to straw man, because every time you try to pin a historical argument.
No, I mean the proper IOer understands that these are topics that don't need to be debated, right? We have the material, we have the content. We can look at the text and see what it says, right? We don't need to debate about what direction fairy tale 12-tribed Israel or 10-tribed Israel went when they were exiled. We don't have to argue about that, right? It's a myth, okay? So why are we making the directional argument anyway, right? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But regardless, even if they did go everywhere, it doesn't matter, right? The story is saying that they're coming back. God is calling them back. He's sending out a mission so that all Israel would be saved. Paul said that blindness in part had happened to Israel until the fullness of the Goyim came in, and in that way all Israel would be saved. So all Israel could not be saved until the fullness of the Goyim came in. That's why the gospel would go to all nations and then the end would come, said Jesus, because he was restoring the kingdom of Israel in an ideal, perfect fairy tale way, and it could not take place without the proper restoration of the northern kingdom, if you will, or if some of you believe in the Ephraim theory, which is my view, that the fullness of nations was strictly the descendants of Ephraim based on Genesis 48. Has to be, no ifs, ands, buts about it. But anyway, that's where I'm going to cap it. We're about an hour and a half. We're about an hour and 8 minutes into Derek's interview here, which we didn't get very far. It's about a third. But I am going to come back and look at this again, hopefully in about a week. But I will release another part soon, and we'll look more at Derek's arguments and the back and forth rhetoric here, and we'll determine if there's anything to be had. So far, absolutely nothing. So far, you can see that the responses from IO are clear, they're sharp, they're logical, they make sense, they honor the story, and they cut through all the nonsense. So, folks, anyway, I hope if you enjoyed it, give it a like, leave a comment. I'll be posting this probably tomorrow, and I hope you all have a great day. See you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.